To this edition of Talkback, our Thursday edition, brought to you by, I love saying that, brought to you by Western States Cat. It's time to get ready for winter with Western States Cat, with cat-branded antifreeze and DEF, all 10% off. And Transport Equipment, your headquarters for RV service, maintenance, and repair on Inspiration Drive. Selway Armory on Stockyard Road, Montana's premier firearms dealer. And by Ponderosa Dental, just off Reserve on 3rd. When you think of a great smile, think of Ponderosa Dental, proud corporate partner of Grizzly Athletics. All right, welcome everybody. It's another great edition of the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Our good friend Bob Seidenschwartz joining us again.
Yeah, like a bad dream. I just keep coming back.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to see both you guys, and good morning, Missoula.
We have a very, very distinguished guest with us on the telephone this morning. First of all, say good morning to John. Hey, John.
Hey, good morning, Peter.
Our celebrated and award-winning show producer over there. John Guandolo is on the phone with us. He is a counterterrorism expert. He created and implemented the FBI's very first counterterrorism training and education program. He's a former FBI agent assigned to the Counterterrorism Division in Washington, D.C. He's the founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com, the only organization in the nation which provides a detailed assessment of the enemy threat in your local area, providing law enforcement investigative solutions, creating state-level counterinsurgency strategies to identify, dismantle, and defeat the jihadi network in your state. Also, the co-author of Sharia, The Threat to America, and also author of the book Raising a Jihadi Generation. So we want to welcome John Guandolo to our program this morning. Mr. Guandolo, good morning, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning to you all.
You bet. And Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, John, welcome back to Missoula. We have you for a little bit of time, so we'll get right to it. Trump's words leading up to his election have been very forceful in terms of what he would do if elected regarding immigration and the border. Let's start with the reality. Do we have the agencies, the resources, and the infrastructure in place that if he was to go through with what he has proposed, do we really have the ability to put that in place given the resources available? And if not, from your perspective, what would have to be done?
Well, we have the resources. We don't have the resources ready. So what I mean by that is at the local and state level for law enforcement, the resources are there, but they don't understand the threat, which has been the point of everything UTT does, everything Understanding the Threat does. So at the local and state level, and quite frankly at the federal level, it's actually even worse. The FBI agents, state and local law enforcement intelligence agencies at our national level, because we don't understand the threat, any strategy given and started to be pushed down into the system is going to be met with resistance and confusion because it's going to be directly contrary to everything that the federal government has been pushing for the last 8 years, and quite frankly, even into the Bush administration. They were not pushing the kinds of strategies and policies that need to be in place to actually protect our communities. So, for instance, if I'm an FBI agent and I was hired in 2009 or 10, and all I've known is combating violent extremism, then it's no wonder that when, for instance, I meet these agents and have discussions with them, many of them will say things like, the threat from vets returning from overseas, or the threats from sovereign citizen group, or the threats from fill in the blank, is just as dangerous as a threat from a Muslim terrorist. That is nonsense, but it's because they don't understand the underlying threat at any depth because they're not being trained on it. So it's not necessarily their individual fault, but they have a professional duty to know this, and the FBI is not trained their people. Certainly DHS is not. And so the local and state law enforcement agencies rely on these organizations, the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and FBI, to push down the strategies and policies that they need to be following. And so a lot of local and state, they just get in line and follow that, and their federal funding is based on them getting in line and following that. So
John,
Mr. Trump...
I'm sorry, John, this is Peter Christian. What specifically, get right down to it, what is the threat Obviously, you've built your most of your career on this threat. What is the threat that we are facing in America as of today?
Well, 100% of our enemies says they're Muslims waging jihad in the cause of Allah to establish a caliphate in Islamic State under Sharia. So that's the threat. And since 100% of our enemies that we've captured on the battlefield or that we've arrested here in the United States or fill in the blank, they all say that. And so our analysis from a professional standpoint, whether it's FBI, Department of Defense, CIA, DHS, our analysis has to begin there. And what you discover is that, in fact, there is no version of Islam that does not require jihad until the entire world is under Islamic rule, and then there is no version of Sharia that defines jihad in any other way than warfare against non-Muslims.
What about Sufism?
Well, what about it? It still teaches Sharia. Sufis,
Not to the
Sufis
extent that the others do, though.
Oh, sure they do. Sufis are the ones who killed the children in Beslan, Russia. So if we're going to make the argument that Sufis are nonviolent, it's a nonsensical argument. There's only one version of Islam. And whether individuals in different regions practice it differently only goes to how we respond and how we react to the threat. In other words, how we build our analysis doesn't change because the threat comes from Islam, and Sharia is a doctrine that is the basis for everything they do. And the fact that
I'm sorry, I was going to say we have to go to a break. But
we have 2 minutes yet.
So. When we get back, or maybe before, if we have that much time, I just got the hand signal here in the studio. By the way, this is John. My question for you is this: your title says, or the slogan on the release here says, "Understanding the Threat is the only organization," and it goes on to say, "that creates state-level counterinsurgency strategies to identify, dismantle, and defeat the jihadi network in your area." When you talk about your area, for a state like Montana, what would that look like?
Well, it would, first of all, understanding that there is an insurgency here in the United States, which is what we share with law enforcement officers around the country. And I think it's, based on your question, it's important to say that when we go out and do our 3-day law enforcement training program, somewhere between 99 and 100% of the law enforcement officers, including FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force agents, will tell us that, number one, they've never heard this information that we're putting out before, and number two, that it's critical to protecting the community. So the relevance of this is pretty clear. The fact that they don't understand and know the network, then they can't address it. So there might be areas, for instance, Montana is one, although it's not free from the threat because you've got organizations there in Montana and Islamic centers that are jihadi organizations. Just like, for instance, and I'll use an example because we were just there a few weeks ago in Minnesota. You've got outlying areas in Minnesota where there's minimal threat there. But the point is you get the law enforcement, the elected officials, and the citizens trained so when the cancer starts bleeding into their county, they know how to deal with it. And the counties that have the threat, we give them the investigative tools to go after them. So at a state level, it's county by county or region by region, or in Louisiana, parish by parish, that they go through and they go after these organizations and leaders from these terrorist groups, jihadi groups, Muslim Brotherhood groups, and they get them out of their county. They use all means legally to do that. And so you're essentially fortifying county by county. And so the argument that we hear sometimes is, well, we don't have a lot of the threat here in our county or in our state. Well, every state has it. We've found no states that don't. But some areas in a state will have literally nothing, and that's good. But the sheriffs and the elected officials and the citizens still need to understand the threat because they're going to outlying areas.
Okay,
like one of the areas
Yeah, we're up against
go ahead.
we're up against a break, but Bob wanted to ask a question. We'll go and we'll answer.
Actually,
it when we
because
come back.
the question, let's go to the break, Peter, and when we come back, I'll pose that to John.
And by the way, all three of our lines are open. If you want to give us a call and talk with John Guandolo, he's said some very provocative things. We'd love to get your thoughts on it. 721-1290 is our number. We're coming right back. And we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. And yes. Oh, well, we have a caller, but Bob had a question first before we get to Dave. So,
John, what you just described to us appears to be a blatant disregard for what the evidence presents itself as. So my question to you is, what has been the difficulty and where does that responsibility go to in terms of why have we not seen from the top down the type of training exposure that you appear to be giving to law enforcement agencies across the country? Where is this disconnect coming from?
Well, first, to answer that question, the strategy of our enemy, specifically in the form, the leading edge of the enemy, which is the Muslim Brotherhood movement, specifically wants to control the narrative. They want to control the message, and they do. And as I put out in my article this morning on understanding.com, in the summertime, the guy who ran the counterterrorism training, counterterrorism program in the irregular warfare section inside the Pentagon publicly said on national radio that Muslim Brotherhood controls the national security decision-making process in the United States. Now, that is one heck of a statement, but it is true, and I concur with that, and UTT officially, publicly concurs with that statement. And so when the 4-star and 3-star generals and admirals, the cabinet-level leadership in this country, and the National Security Council, for instance, for this current administration and the previous one, when they look to their left and their right, and the people they're looking to, their Islamic advisors, we can identify by name as being a part of this hostile Islamic movement in the United States, in most cases, members of the Muslim Brotherhood, in some cases, Hamas leaders, which is an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and in a few cases, Al-Qaeda members wearing suits, then that would explain why this training is shut down, because they're controlling the narrative that this has nothing to do with Islam. And you can go to YouTube, go to our YouTube channel. I've got a video called Islam is Peace, ? And you've got Mrs. Clinton and President Bush and John Kerry and President Obama all mouthing the same talking points of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood. This has nothing to do with Islam. And so that training, that impacts directly the fact that you can't train what Sharia is. You cannot teach what Islam teaches their children in Islamic schools in places like Montana at the MSAs when you are not around. But when you actually pull the materials out, which is what UTT does, and we teach cops what Muslim Islamic centers and mosques teach Muslims when there's no non-Muslims around, that's what you get. What you get is in 7th grade textbooks, what ISIS teaches is what they're teaching. They might teach it in a little different way, but they're still teaching that jihad is a requirement, that the only way to get to heaven is by dying in jihad against the non-Muslims. So I just have to say, what in the hell are we talking about? Not you guys, but when we're talking as a nation, what is the FBI director and the DHS secretary, what are they talking about when they say this has nothing to do with Islam? It's an out-and-out lie, and they're legally charged with knowing this.
Now, John, I think that one of the reasons that is given, I've heard this argument used before, but basically that you can't, as a nation, put yourself at odds with all of Islam because it represents so many people in the world in so many diverse countries with something like 1.3 billion, nearly a quarter of Earth's population identifying as Muslim. If we're going to have a livable world in the future, we're going to have to try to co-opt some of these groups into a more democratic fold.
Yeah, that's the argument that's made, and that's, again,
so I guess my leading with that was to get you to respond to it. I guess I want to see how you would respond to that argument.
Right. We have never fought an enemy like that, that we have to co-opt people in, or else we can't fight them. They're enemies, we can fight them. The distinction is, and here I want to be clear, that for now 14 years inside and outside the FBI that I've been doing this, the argument has never been made, and I've never made the argument, that everyone who self-identifies as a Muslim is an enemy to the United States. What is clear and can never be wrong is that the doctrine of Islam is hostile to the West, is specifically hostile to the U.S. Declaration and the Constitution and our federal code, and that has to be addressed. And we can't discuss solutions that are actually practical and will work if we deny that this threat has nothing it involves Islam. You're never this, and this is the entire point of the enemy strategy. So long as we're looking at white supremacists, and so long as we're looking at veterans, and so long as we're looking at radical extremists, part of the article this morning I wrote is the entire Combating Violent Extremism program at the Department of Homeland Security was created in England by the Muslim Brotherhood to keep us chasing our tail while they continue to kill and take over countries.
Wow.
That's their whole strategy.
Tell you what, John, we have a quick caller here. Let's get Dave on the line. Dave, thanks for holding. You're on with John Guandolo. Go ahead.
Yes, I've heard the threat, but I'm curious what the solution is. Are you advocating something like a crusade, like the Christian crusade against Muslims? I am curious how you're going to deal with this.
Okay, thanks, Dave. John?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to what I just said. We can't discuss a solution until we understand the threat. So I'm going to assume that you've read Raising a Jihadi Generation, watched the DVD, read our articles on understandingthethreat.com, and you have a clear understanding of the threat. Well, then we can start to have a discussion about the solution. We put out last week a couple articles, and one of them listed some things that we believe need to be done. Number one, I'm talking about here in the United States first. The Muslim Brotherhood needs to be designated a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO, legally by the U.S. government. And even before that's done, the Holy Land Foundation case, which was the largest terrorism financing and Hamas trial in American history, produced a massive amount of evidence from a 15-year FBI investigation in which the largest Islamic charity in America was identified as a terrorist organization, Hamas, excuse me, and its leaders and the organization itself were convicted using that evidence, and that evidence also revealed that the most prominent Islamic organization.
Hey, John, we're losing our connection with you for some reason.
For some reason, you became. We're up against a break.
We'll fix it during the break, okay?
Yeah. So we'll be right back, and we've got Marilyn on the line, and so stay with us. John Guandolo continues in a moment. Okay, we are back, and we went a little long in that last segment. We have about 2 minutes here, Bob and John. Go ahead.
Get our caller in real quick.
Let's get Marilyn in. Marilyn, real quickly, what's your question for John Guandolo?
Real quickly. Okay, first of all, I'm very thankful to finally be hearing this side and this information. Some of us have been trying to get this message out for a long time, and all we've gotten is Islam as a religion of peace and love. I've been sick of it. So,
by the way, this is John's second appearance on the show.
Okay, well, I was familiar with his name. I wasn't sure if it was, another talk show or where I'd heard it. Anyways,
what's your question?
Okay, John, Keith Ellison, his connections to the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE, the front groups that they have put around this country, and especially in D.C. for many, many years to infiltrate. I've read the book Muslim Mafia. That opened my eyes way big to how much they have infiltrated our country and their agenda to Islamize America. So, anyways, I appreciate you being here. I hope you can just get out so much of what these people need to hear.
Let's give them, we have exactly 1 minute for you to respond, John. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you for the comment. I would just let you know that Chris Gobbets, who was who went undercover at Hamas doing business as the Council on American Islamic Relations, is the vice president of UTT with me. I brought him on board about 11 months ago. phenomenal ad. Yeah, I mean, the penetration is significant, but so long as we listen to a message that's counterfactual, there is no factual basis to say that what ISIS and Al-Qaeda are doing does not conform with Islamic teachings. There's none. And so people that say it are either intentionally lying or utterly ignorant of what Islam teaches. That's it.
All right. And with that, we're up against our break. We'll be back in a few minutes. We've got top of the hour news standing by. John Guandolo is going to stay with us, and we have 3 lines open. If you'd like to visit, agree, disagree, get the conversation going here. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. You're also welcome to put your opinion if you can't call, or if the lines are full, you can put your comments on our Facebook page. We'll be happy to pass those along to Mr. Guandolo as well. The Montana World Affairs Council continues when we come back right after this. Back to Talk Back, brought to you this morning by Selway Armory, Ponderosa Dental, Western States Cat, and by Transport Equipment. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Talk Back. Peter Christian, John King, Bob Seidenschwartz, John Guandolo joining us on the phone. Go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, John Guandolo is former FBI agent, and if you want to find out more about him or his website, you can check out understandingthethreat.com. We've had a few requests for that information. Before the break, though, John, wanted you to touch on one of the things that Marilyn asked that we didn't get a response from, and that was about Congressman Keith Ellison. He's being basically considered potentially one of the top 2 candidates to run the DNC, America's most cherished organization after this last primary battle, of course.
Right.
And she was wondering if there are ties to these groups that you mentioned earlier. Was hoping you could reflect on that.
Well, yes, Keith Ellison has direct ties to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood through not just the Council on American Islamic Relations, but the Islamic Society of North America and many of the other Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the United States. So that is absolutely something that is very clear. Chris Gobbets, who's the vice president of UTT with me, went undercover in 2008 against CARE and was present when Keith Ellison and the other Muslim congressman, Andre Carson of Indiana, spoke at a Hamas event at the Islamic Society of North America's conference. And he had, there's actually a picture of him and Andre Carson. Anyway, to get to the point, yes, he has made it very clear that he supports these organizations, Hamas, doing business as CARE, ISNA, and others, that the federal court in the largest Hamas trial in American history has identified as Muslim Brotherhood organizations. In the case of ISNA, financially supporting Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and in the case of CARE, is Hamas, per the evidence.
Okay, now
So,
Bob,
yeah, he's a problem.
Yeah, Bob also has a question for you before we get to our phone call.
John, I opened up the conversation with a question about Trump and his approach. You've clearly stated that it appears that previous presidents have ignored this, different people within the administration. How would the Trump presidency look from your perspective on this issue?
Oh, and by the way, I want to ask just a simple question to tag onto that. Do you think Donald Trump understands the threat?
I think at the gut level, yes. I think at the level of detail that he needs to. I don't think he does yet. I do believe that there are people around him that do. And so, well, I know there are people around him that do. And so that's a good thing. That's a good start. And the fact that we have opposed, we being UTT, opposed Chris Christie, Mike Rogers, Senator Corker, Congressman McCall, who have been absolutely defenders of jihadis and their strategies here in the United States, whether it's wittingly or unwittingly, but they've also lashed out at people that speak truth about this. So they have no place in this administration. I wrote about that as well just on Monday. And actually, Mr. Christie has been punted. Mike Rogers was punted. And we're hoping that Senator Corker and Congressman McCall will be punted from having any business inside the administration. And at some point, hopefully, McCall will be removed from being the Homeland Security chairman in the House, chairman for the Homeland Security Committee. But yes, I mean, Mr. Trump gets it at a gut level. he needs to understand the nature of it and the massive network that exists here in the United States that continues to produce jihadis in San Bernardino, Orlando, Boston, Chattanooga, etc.
All right, John. We have callers. You have become a rock star. You filled up our phone line. So let's get Corinne on the line. Corinne, you are on with John Guandolo. Go ahead.
Thank you, John. I am so grateful that you are on here. You're speaking the truth, and you're being upright and very forthright with the absolute truth. I have been studying the Muslim and the Quran, and it is horrifying what it says that they should do to us and how they want to take over America. And I just pray that people will learn the truth and figure it out. Couple questions. One, what do you think Trump should do with him saying that he would, get rid of all the illegals in America, and including all groups, and sanctuary cities? Unfortunately, Missoula is quote unquote one of those. And
well, the university, specifically, Corinne, the University of Montana has declared itself a sanctuary campus.
Okay, well, and that too. I'm curious what he thinks that we should do about it. It's very scary. I've read the Quran. I've listened to both Sharon Hadian, who is, everybody should listen to him. He is an ex-Muslim, and he tells you the truth of what the Quran says. And you saw my DAC doc. Very good. I hope people will go and listen to this man.
We're going to get some more calls in, okay?
Yes.
Thanks for the call. So your response to Corinne, John, before we take our first break of the hour.
The only thing I would want to say about sanctuary cities is they're unconstitutional, and if we had a functioning federal government and an attorney general that actually wanted to follow the Constitution and federal law, I would put the full weight of the federal government against sanctuary cities. We fought a civil war about this. You don't get to make something legal that's illegal at the federal level if you're a state. Unfortunately, the federal government has run rampant and has usurped authority they don't have, but where they should be exerting authority, they are not. And one of them is when a state says, hey, we're going to let illegals in, and we don't care what you say, the federal government should put its boot down on that state, because that is dangerous to our national security. And that state needs to be civilly and criminally held liable. And so there's a lot of weight of the federal government that should come down on that. Absolutely. And I think you're going to see that under a Trump administration. I don't think they're going to tolerate that. You can't vote as a state to make something legal that is in violation of federal law. That's the supremacy clause of the Constitution.
Gotcha.
Maybe somebody in Washington would want to read it.
Okay. We're going to come right back. Ron and Bobby, we have a line open as well. 721-1290 is our number. John Guandolo joining us this morning, counterterrorism expert, founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com, and we continue in a moment. And we are back on Talkback. Stimulating conversation going on this morning. We've got John King over there. We've got Bob Seidenschwartz here. On the phone with us is John Guandolo, who's with us, the author of the book Raising a Jihadi Generation and founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com. So I asked the question during the break, John. I'm sure people label you a hater all the time, right?
Yep.
But by the way, it's very prevalent. I went to, because I couldn't remember the name of your website, so I went to look you up. The very first result on Google is, this is the title of the piece, by the Hate Watch staff at the Southern Poverty Law Center, disgraced former FBI agent John Guandolo providing anti-Muslim law enforcement training in Colorado. Yeah, you definitely have a bunch of
you've got your fans,
haters, I guess.
Yeah. All right, let's get back. Let's get back to the phones. We got a lot of folks want to visit with you. Ron, you're on with John Guandolo. Hi.
Hi. Hey, John. Everybody talks about Sharia law in the Quran, and a lot of people just don't seem to realize that Muhammad and a few followers have got a lot of other basic books written. And Muhammad declared that migration is their first line of attack. And it's also required or okay to lie while making treaties and agreements with other peoples and other countries and such. And I mean, how can you even sit down and talk to any group of Muslims when their religion is telling them to lie? I mean, it's just required that they're involved in deception.
Okay, we're going to let him answer that. Thanks, Ron. Thanks for the call. So, John, what do you think?
Well, this is the point. I'm actually working on today, sending to the editor today, that my next book called It's All About Sharia, which will be a very short, succinct book. And online, I'm open. I have a book open here from Reliance of the Traveler, which is 14th century Islamic law published in Beltsville, Maryland. And it has the seal of approval, the certification from Al-Azhar, which is the gold standard in Islam for Islamic jurisprudence, because Islam is a totalitarian system governed by a law, which is Sharia. And in it, it says lying, and the section under R8.0 is permissible lying. It is permissible to lie if attaining the goal is permissible, and obligatory to lie if the goal is obligatory. Jihad is obligatory. And apostasy in Islam, which is leaving Islam, is a capital crime. And when we look, we sometimes think that apostasy is simply just converting out of Islam. But one of the 20 listed acts that entail leaving Islam, capital crime, is number 19, to be sarcastic about any ruling of sacred law. Number 14, to deny the obligatory character of something which by a consensus of Muslims is a part of Islam, which is the Sharia. So that's a capital crime, not to follow Sharia. There's the first chapter in this book of Islamic law is the obligatory nature for all Muslims to know Sharia and what it is, because it is supposed to guide everything a Muslim does, from how they wash their face to how they get married, and especially how they conduct war. This is very important. The shaheed, the Muslim who dies in battle against the non-Muslim forces, obtains, according to the Quran, the highest place in paradise above all other Muslims. Jihad is the core of Islam. It's absolutely core to Islam. And the only reason jihad is not one of the 5 pillars is because when the entire world is under Islamic rule, which is the purpose of Islam, there will be no more need for jihad, so it cannot be a pillar. But it is absolutely core doctrine. Understanding Sharia and what it actually says, this is a big part of what we do as UTT when we teach law enforcement. One more. Out of the most widely used 7th grade textbook in Islamic schools in America, called What Islam is All About, the word jihad is most often associated with the act of physically confronting evil and wrongdoing. If anyone dies in jihad, they automatically go to paradise. A shaheed or martyr is described this way by Allah. Don't think that those who are killed in Allah's cause are dead. No, they are alive, finding their bounty in the presence of the Lord. And in the last section of this book, on the Islamic society, it says the duty of the Muslim is to be loyal to the Islamic State. So this is what they're teaching children in the United States, and those are just little snippets I just gave you. Why would they teach it? How could they teach that if it's a capital crime to teach something or to say something about Sharia or sacred law that's not true?
Okay,
it's a capital crime.
Let's get some more calls in. Bobby, you're on with John Guandolo. Go ahead.
Okay, so Obama and Hillary supported the Arab Spring in Egypt, and they both supported Morsi, and they supported the Muslim Brotherhood. Even after Morsi was overthrown, they continued to support the Muslim Brotherhood. And I wanted to know if you thought Obama was being delusional, or if he was deliberately not being honest. I'll take your answer off the phone.
Thanks for the call. John?
Well, so the first thing is he's deliberately doing what he's doing. He can't, but I don't know why we're surprised about that. I know he is listen, he just gave over $1 billion to the largest nation-state sponsor of terrorism on the planet, Iran. Nobody seems to care. That's in violation of federal law, by the way, materially support terrorists. But if I were to send $1,000 to the government Iran, I would and should be prosecuted. A president sends $1 billion, and we don't seem to care. So, yeah, that's deliberate. I would also say, though, and I think this is important, when you understand what we're talking about here, you can predict that. When I was recruited out of the Bureau and worked with a group called the SEG, Strategic Engagement Group, I was actually recruited out by the DOD and worked within DOD. It was just 3 of us in that group, and we were the only ones on the planet that called and briefed members of Congress in November 2010 that in the next 60 to 90 days there would be a massive revolution led by the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East. There wasn't an Arab Spring. And the reason I say this is not just like to pat myself on the back. It's to say, when you understand this enemy, you know how they're going to operate, you know how what they're going to do in the direction they're going, and you know how to defeat them. When we make the intentional decision not to do that, there's only one outcome that's possible, and that's defeat.
All right.
And the problem is many Americans can't imagine that outcome right now.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and I know you only have 10 more minutes with us, John, so we're going to cherish those moments. We have Maggie and Candy waiting, and we'll get them on here right after this quick break. Stay with us. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and we are with John Guandolo, who's with us this morning. He's the author of the book Raising a Jihadi Generation and founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com. We've been talking about the threat of terrorism in this country, and we have lots of folks who still want to visit with you in the last few minutes of our time together. So, Maggie, you've been holding the longest. Go ahead.
I'm appalled that I'm listening to this hate speech in our own town, in my own house. My question for him is, why are you an ex-FBI agent?
Okay. Thanks, Maggie. Appreciate that. So why are you an ex-FBI agent, John?
Well, in 2006, I put together the very first training program inside the government on the Muslim Brotherhood, Sharia, and the global Islamic movement. And while we had Department of Justice analysts and an assistant U.S. attorney who sat through the 2-week program and said everyone in the government should have this, the response by the leadership in the FBI was not nearly as warm. And when I started coming against the Bureau, I started getting pushed out of the counterterrorism division, and by the fall of 2008 was kind of dead in the water. And I had been given an opportunity by very senior people at the Pentagon, at the Department of Defense, that if I ever got dead in the water, they would immediately bring me over, and they did. And I was recruited out of the FBI, where essentially I was given more money and complete freedom to go around the country speaking to 3- and 4-star generals, members of Congress, and other people to explain to them the true nature of this threat. And that's what I did from the end of 2008 until 2012, where that program at DOD, President Obama directly cut the funding for our group, and so then I set out and set up UTT, and okay. I've been doing that ever since.
Go ahead, Bob.
John, I'm actually very grateful for Maggie's call from this perspective. When she said, "Why are you, propagating this hate speech here in our town?" This is not a sentiment that I think is going to be unusual. In fact, it's going to be quite common across the entire country. So how do we break down that type of view if you want people to listen and to take you seriously with what you have been discussing here on the radio today?
Well, I think, people that make those kind of comments, apparently she's not listening to anything we said. And so some people are just either arrogant, hard-headed, or whatever.
Well, they just don't. I think what it is, John, they don't want to believe it because, like I said at the outset of our program, we have been bombarded for years and years and years that, hey, there's only a tiny fraction of Islam that carries this type of belief system, and the rest of Islam, has turned their back on them and that sort of thing. So we hear that over and over again. And after a while, we believe it.
Well, but the reality, if we live in the land, we walk away from the land of unicorns and cotton candy sky, and we actually live in the world of reality. The world of reality is, my challenge to the last caller would be, and to anybody who holds that sentiment, is name me one book of Islamic law or one place on the planet, Islamic center, mosque, or Islamic school, that teaches a version of Islam that's different from the one ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, Tablighi Jamaat teach. And you won't find one. And the reason you won't find one is because, number one, that's what Islam is. And number two, it's a capital crime for Muslims to teach other Muslims something about Islam that's not true.
So, John...
And so you teach...
my question... Okay, go ahead.
Well, this is for this caller. We have put out publicly for a long time that if you can demonstrate something we teach about the network here, the Jihadi network, the Muslim Brotherhood network, or about Sharia that we are teaching that's untrue, we will stop publicly saying it, we'll take it out of our briefings, and we will give the person who brings it to our attention $1,000 cash. And I have publicly or personally sent that information to some of these hostile organizations and said, hey, $1,000 waiting for you. All you got to do is show us where we're wrong. And they've never done it, and nobody's ever done it. And the reason they haven't done it is because we're not wrong. Your caller is wrong. And we need to stop pussyfooting around this stuff and say, you're wrong. There's no version of Islam that doesn't teach jihad as an obligation until the entire world is under Sharia and Islamic State is established.
Okay, John.
The problem is people know Muslims who don't scream this stuff out, so we think that that's a different version of Islam.
Okay,
so,
go ahead, John.
So my question for you, John, is this. If all Islam is, as you say, is there any path out for a moderate Islam, or do you just feel Islam needs to be quashed through, some kind of global war? I mean, how do you come to grips with either, you need to have either a path to reform or you need to have elimination. So, I mean, I don't see how we have any, there's not an easy middle ground here.
Right. First, we have to deal with it in reality. Their understanding from a military standpoint, we have to understand their understanding of defeat the way they understand it, not the way we want it. For them to be defeated, for them to stop the global jihad, they have to be utterly smashed. The West has waged 9 wars against Muslims from the time that Muhammad first started moving. And in his first 108 years, he went from, being a nothing in Mecca to being on the outskirts of Paris in the around 710. And so that's the problem. It's an expansion. It's not a religion. It's a totalitarian system governed by a law. So, yes, we have to crush it, and that's the only way that we're going to deal with it. But it means it's not all military. The preponderance of how they're fighting the war is in the information battle space, which is why what you just said is true. Many people think we've been told for years it's a religion of peace. Well, that's a lie. That's just not factually true. There's no basis in fact to say that, except to say they say there will be peace when the entire world is under Sharia. So you can say it's a religion of peace if you define peace the way Sharia understands it.
I know we're almost out of time, but I got one more caller in. Candy, been waiting the longest. Real quickly, what's your point?
I thank you, John, for this information. But we live in a liberal oligarchy in Missoula, Missoula County, and bring this home. How can we stop people in government, in our government, to stop doing this sanctuary city, welcoming city, refugee city? Tell us how we as citizens here in this county and in Missoula can handle this and stop these people from overriding the citizens of Missoula.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Candy. So, John?
Well, so Kenny, I would say thank you for your question. The people in America are the sovereign, not the elected officials. So we live in a representative republic, a constitutional republic, and we need to remember that. We're the sovereign. We need to stand up and make our voices heard, and I think the problem is many people have become so pacified in our society. I think it first begins with reestablishing the founding principles of the law of nature and the law of nature's God, which is the foundation of our formation of law and government in this country, which I find the vast majority of elected officials and law enforcement officials at the federal, state, and local level are not aware of. And yet it was taught for the first 150 years in this country in our law schools. But we've lost that, certainly in the last 60-plus years. So that would be important. I think getting your sheriffs and citizens, especially pastors, to understand this and speak about founding principles and about the threat we're talking about. Those two things, because what you're dealing with when you talk about these issues is you're talking about people that don't believe in America's founding principles.
Right.
You can't get to these outcomes if you believe in America's founding principles. No. And you have to understand what they're advocating is a destruction of our system when they advocate these little changes. It's a death by 1,000 cuts in our society.
Now, John, we are up against a break here, and we've got all of our lines humming to visit with you. Can you stay with us a little while longer?
I could give you one more short 10-minute segment.
Okay, we'll do it.
And then
we'll do
I've got
it.
the punch.
All right, we will be right back. Stay with us. We have Dave, Eric, and Garth, and we'll be right back.
Dude.
Okay, we are rocking right along, and we unfortunately, John can't stay with us too terribly much longer, so I want to get some more calls in. Dave's been waiting the longest. Dave, you're on with John Guandolo. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning.
Now, you've already been on, Dave.
Yeah, I have one more question.
Real quick.
ISIS has been ruling a lot of part of Iraq and Syria with Sharia law, but now they're being attacked by other Muslims. Now, it doesn't make sense to me. If Sharia law is the law, why would other Muslims be fighting ISIS, not joining them?
Let's let him answer that. So, John, what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, that's a great question, and the understanding this entire battle helps answer that question. Currently, the global Islamic movement is focused on the Muslim community because Islamic writings make it clear that the Muslim community has to be brought into compliance with Sharia. And the Muslim community, because Sharia is so antithetical to human nature, what we see over history is a hardcore approach when we have Muhammad to abiding by the Sharia, which comes from the Quran and the example of the Prophet himself. And they do it. And then over time, in certain areas, people drift because it's who wants to live under Sharia when you actually see what it is. What you saw in Afghanistan under the Taliban, that's what it looks like. And so people drift from it, and people don't want it. It's the same reason that Muslims stood by non-Muslims in Central Africa in the last several years and were killed by the jihadis there because they did not want to live under that rule, and so they died along with their neighbors.
Okay.
It's the same reason you see Muslims fighting it. They don't want to live under Sharia.
Okay, let's move along.
That's the reality.
Let's get another call on. Eric, real quickly, what's your question?
I was wondering how long it would take you to get to bombing the hell out of them. And I'm not opposed to at all. I think we should obey our Constitution, go back to our forms of government, that is, where government protects rights. But your war rhetoric is what bothers me badly. And it's amazing how you get people on the war bandwagon. But our allies in Saudi Arabia Do you want to bomb the hell out of them?
Okay, so thanks for the call, Eric. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure where he got the fact that I want to bomb the hell out of everybody as a part of what we've been talking about today, but I definitely have said, I guess my question back to the gentleman would be, would you rather you live under slavery? Would you rather that liberty, the light of liberty, die out? Because that's the alternative.
So are you saying that you don't want to... Are you saying you don't want to be more militarily engaged with the Islamic world?
I'm saying the problem is we've only been militarily engaged, and that's why we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, because our Islamic advisors told us it's okay to write constitutions in Iraq and Afghanistan that make them Islamic republics under Sharia, and we lost those wars because of it. So we lost the war in 2005 when the morons at the State Department created those constitutions that the U.S. government wrote for those countries. We achieved al-Qaeda's objectives there. So it's not just a military campaign. They are coming after us from using military ease, if you will, in dozens of different lines of operations: political warfare, espionage, counterintelligence, information operations, propaganda, military conflicts. All of these ways they're coming after us.
Hey,
and what are we doing? Our response has been primary military, but I would throw it back at that caller. If he's saying liberty and the life of his children and grandchildren aren't worth fighting for, then just get out of the way, because some of us believe it is. And you can reap the benefits of it. Just keep your mouth shut while we're doing it, please, so we can get the work done.
Let's get one more call in, because I know, and John also wanted to make a comment, too.
We have a Facebook comment. We've had quite a few. We have a question from a couple of people. They want to know what taquilla is. I hope I'm saying that right. It sounds like a taco stand.
So taquilla falls under the law that I read before, under lying. But taquilla is actually more of a tactical measure. It was Shia Muslims lying to Sunni Muslims that saying, well, we're actually Sunni too, in order to keep from being killed by the Sunnis. But it's now become a term that people use generally to say that lying is acceptable in Islam, but it is acceptable. But when I talk about it, I'm talking about Muslims lying to the non-Muslim community, which is not only permissible, it's obligatory when the goal is obligatory, such as in jihad. But remember, jihad is not just military fighting, it's total warfare.
Okay, let's get Garth. Well, this will be, I believe, our last caller with John. So, Garth, real quickly, what's your point?
Yeah, real quick is that KGVO has got to be complimented, because a couple years ago you had a lady on a Sunday talk show who said exactly everything that this gentleman is saying. And the second part of the quick conversation is, for 8 years I've heard everybody in news people say that they don't understand, why is Obama doing this? Why is Obama doing that? My prediction is, when he's out of office, in a very short time, you're going to see him praying in a mosque, and you'll understand why he did what he did. That's all.
Okay. All right. So, John, we are completely out of time. Thank you for spending an extra 10 minutes with us. We appreciate it. Where can people find out more about what you're doing?
Well, we encourage folks, and I certainly encourage them, go to understandingthethreat.com, sign up for our newsletter, like our Facebook page. Our Twitter handle is UTT_USA. Definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, Understanding the Threat, and watch some of those videos. We've got the book, Raising a Jihadi Generation. We have the Understanding the Threat to America DVD. We've got the new book, It's All About Sharia, that will be published here hopefully before Christmas, and a new DVD series, an 8 DVD series coming out that will lay this threat out point by point for folks. That'll be coming out between now and the end of February. So,
all right. Well, John, it's been a pleasure.
All of those are ways that they can stay in touch. Stay in touch.
And thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, and thanks for sharing all that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. And we're way overdue for a break. So we'll be back. Erica and Mike, well, if you want to stay on, we'll be happy to get your comments on. Very provocative thoughts. We'll be right back.
station.
Oh, yeah. 721-1290 is the number. John King over there, Bob Seidenschwartz. I'm Peter Christian. Unfortunately, Mr. Guandolo could not stay with us. He had other things to do. But we have lots of folks who want to weigh in. So let's get right back to the phones. Erica, thanks for holding. Good morning.
Yeah,
it's Eric. I'm sorry. It looked like Erica.
Yes.
I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah, people do call me Erica. But anyway, your guest was the one who brought up military war, and engagements with Islam.
Well, the question he was asked was, how do you propose to defeat this? It's either going to be ideologically or militarily or both. So,
Yeah, it's ideologically first, but he was the one who brought it up.
Okay.
I didn't.
All right.
And then he put us between a rock and a hard place by proposing that his doctrine, his ideology takes you to kill them all. That's where his doctrine leads.
Well, possibly. I tried to push him on this because I asked him that question.
should,
Are you
John.
saying there's no reform possible, or is it complete elimination and global war?
Well,
and he
the
gave me
thing
this.
is-
He gave me a really kind of gray answer. He said we have to defeat them all. But
that's where his doctrine takes you.
But he didn't say that defeat meant military defeat. I was trying to push him there, and he wouldn't say it.
Right. Yes. I mean, logically, and we do, and this is what is the main emphasis in the Bible on bearing the image of God, is taking things is the law of logic. Jesus, the Word became logic. This is a part of bearing the image of God. The logical implications of where he's taking us is to kill them all.
So let me ask this question to you, Eric, our audience, and my two learned colleagues here. Historically, have we been able to, using purely military action, quash the issue and subordinate this so that for security purposes, for peace and harmony?
Are you talking about the U.S.?
I'm just talking in general. Where has military action been able to wipe out this threat in its entirety throughout history? I've not seen an example.
Islam and its dominance in the world, where it is at a quarter of the human population under its ideological thumb, it got there through military conquest.
John, not in all cases. I mean,
in most of the cases.
Well, you have to be specific. You can't say a little of this.
Okay, Muhammad himself led the charge.
And that's pretty specific. One of the things I would say is, as you go further from the center of Saudi Arabia, the origins of Islam, you really need to look at the historical perspective of how did Islam spread. In some cases, yes, through military intervention. In other cases, is it any different than somebody who's proselytizing, as we have different religions doing today, not using military force?
And when the Mongolians came into conflict with the Islamic traditions, I mean, they were brutal. They buried salt in the ground so their grass wouldn't grow anymore. I mean, they wiped them out, and they didn't have problems for a couple decades. Then it came back to biome.
Okay, we have Mike and Harry waiting. We're up against our last 1 minute break.
Okay, here's the Genghis Khan.
I'm just
pounding
saying,
our shoes on the table
it's
here.
pretty obvious. Like, war defeats enemies. Okay. But ideological enemies are different, right? They live on.
We're going to be right back.
Question. No. Hey.
And we are back. 721-1290 is our number. Okay, let's move right along. Mike has been waiting the longest. Mike, go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, all right, no, thank you for taking my call in. As far as they talk about war, what I like about what John said is America writing the Constitution for the Middle East people. I think that's very important. What people need to understand is that who are influencing these modern-day warfare, human-induced disasters, and that's developed countries. With that being said, indigenous people of undeveloped countries, they don't have the technology to start these. So people just need to understand who has the sources to go over to on these undeveloped countries to start these human-induced disasters, war, to create genocide, and that's the purpose of creating wars, civil war, and to wipe out the dominant group for control and power prestige over the land for natural resource riches. And so,
Mike, are you reading from a textbook? Because this sounds like a definition of genocide and imperialism and colonialism, but, just keep the question to the Middle East. There was first of all, Iraq and Syria, these are ancient cultures. I would not even describe them as third world in terms of economies and culture.
Right, like you said before, though, like if you have to understand the history of the modern war and everything, and where they're at today, and so who influenced them to be they are today, and you have to understand America's history itself. What happened to the Native Americans? I mean, who influenced and created the genocide of Native Americans? Well, that's just my comment. So thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. So, Harry, good morning. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. The gentleman that John, he was just, I can see he's making money by peddling fear, which is, good capitalistic idea. He's nothing sells better than fear. But, you can,
unless it's the profit motive. Yeah, but
well,
go ahead, yeah.
Well, that's how you make profit, by pushing fear, and they get money for the fear. Yeah.
Gotcha, all right.
But, he pushed, saying that Islam is violent, and you can go through the Quran. I've read it once. It's a long time ago, but there's a lot of violent. But I can go through the Bible. I mean, and pick and choose and say, well, Deuteronomy 13 says what you should do with apostates. I mean, the end of the Bible. How do the Christian Bible ends? Everybody shall bow knee to Jesus, and the blood will flow through the breast of the horses. So it's through does that mean that Christians want to conquer the world? I mean, I could make that point that but is it true? I mean, it's this idea that Muslims is so violent. Well, I can pick and choose through the Bible and make the Christians sound like they're violent. The Mosaic Law.
Yeah, the difference is you're not a Christian leader, but Muslim leaders are picking through their Quran and inciting violence.
Some of them are. Well, Jordan is a Muslim.
Some of them are.
Jordan is a Muslim nation, but they're very peaceful. They treat their people very well. The women don't have to wear. So I mean, Mosaic Law is very brutal. I mean, does that mean the Jews are brutal people? I mean, and I understand you have somebody on there. It's the freedom of speech, and want all people to be able to put out their ideas. But in that case, why don't you have somebody who thinks the Jews are all the problems? I mean, get somebody on there, discuss that.
I can answer that for you. Definitely not.
You can get this Muslim guy, this anti-Muslim, will have somebody who's anti-Jewish.
I'll give you a good reason why not. And I actually talked about this off air earlier. So I think the problem with the difference between Muslim and Jews are tied to a genetic race of people. I mean, they're a people group.
Well, not all.
But Muslim now there is an ideology of Judaism. If someone wanted to say Judaism was a problem in the world, I'd be happy to talk about that. But if someone wants to say Islam is a problem in the world, I'm happy to talk about that. That's a set of ideas. It's an ideology like capitalism or communism, and I think we should be debating these things, whether or not they're true or whether or not they're dangerous. And frankly,
thinks Judaism is bad.
Well, go ahead, talk about it. I'm not going to stop you.
I'm not saying I think of it. I just say put somebody on here that does.
Well, find someone. Frankly, most people don't think Judaism is a big problem.
Actually, we have a rabbi on next Tuesday. He's coming from Germany. He'll be here in Missoula. And we will have him on the radio, so we'll have an opportunity
to have that discussion. We invite you to call and ask him about it.
But see, that's the thing.
Okay. Thanks. We're out of time.
We're not talking about ideologies at that point.
Yeah. Anyway. All right.
Can I say something very quickly?
Surely.
This was a discussion we had off air.
2 minutes.
You had it was said, well, could this be offensive or problematic for some of our speakers or guests? And I think we all agreed that we're not trying to promote a particular viewpoint or agenda. We're just providing the forum. And we engage in discussion. We engage in conversation here. So this is a beautiful opportunity to hear people's views and thoughts about this. And as an entity, this is what we do.
When the rally was held, the pro-immigration rally was held, and all these hundreds of people down by the X's, and they had the big march down to Karis Park, the big rally, covered that. Okay, got all sorts of kudos. Way to go! Nice job. And then I think the next day or a couple days later, there was a very small get-together of folks who were opposed to it in front of the courthouse.
Right.
Covered that, got slammed and hammered as being a hater because I covered that with exactly the same type of coverage as I covered the other one.
Right.
I mean, that is what we're supposed to do here.
Right.
And whether you agree or disagree, that is where the discussion begins. And that's what we're trying to do. So there you go.
Kudos to you guys for doing that.
Anyway, that's where sometimes we trip and fall. Sometimes we don't do it as fairly as you think we should. That's why you should call and say, hey, what about this? What about this? We are open to suggestions all the time.
Yeah, and to back up again onto Harry's point, because I think it is an interesting distinction. It's important to make. Like, it's a big difference to say, Peter, I hate you as a person. That's a big statement, right? But to say, Peter, I think I hate that idea of yours. That idea that you have, I think it's hurting you and it's going to hurt the United States. That's a different conversation. And so, when we express disagreement, if we're talking about ideas, I think that's what we should be doing.
Without attacking each other.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's hopefully the basic basis of free speech in this country. At least it's supposed to be, as far as I know. Okay, tomorrow on Talk Back, of course, tomorrow is Friday, so we'll have Hunter's Breakfast, and then we'll have an hour of Talk Back. I'm assuming it's going to be open phones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys have a great day, and we haven't had the big snowfall we were expecting. So all you hunters, I'm sorry about that. But we will be back tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock with Montana Morning, and then Talk Back at 9 after Hunter's Breakfast. Have a great day.
So